Adds up to a fairly blustery day on Friday, but with the winds picking up, it won't be as cold overnight. We'll start Friday in double digits for quite a few of us. Then, for the details for Friday, it's all about tracking these bands of rain swinging through. Probably not too much rain. Of course, he's dangling in the southeast. Just a few showers zipping through here, but for parts of Northern Ireland, a very wet morning. Southern Scotland, Northern England looking very soggy, and it will be blustery wherever you are. That area of low pressure bringing the wet and windy weather on Friday slowly pulls away through the weekend. So gradually through the weekend, it will be turning a good deal drier. Goodbye.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News. A very good evening to you. It's 8 o'clock. On Brazier tonight, Meghan Markle apologises to a British court for forgetting that she'd cooperated with the authors of a book about her life. Lots on that. Also a claim today from Belarusia that half of all the migrants massing on the Polish border want to reach the UK. I'll talk live to Poland's Deputy Foreign Minister about that. And tonight's Brazier angle, why Glasgow should be proud of the industrial revolution it did so much to kickstart, in spite of anything Nicola Sturgeon might have to say about it. All that's coming up, but first, the news with Polly.
You're watching GB News, and these are your latest news headlines. Boris Johnson says the world is closer than ever to the beginning of the end of climate change. Negotiators from nearly 200 countries are scrutinising a first draft of the COP26 agreement, hoping to strike a deal before the summit ends on Friday. It comes as the United States and China, the world's biggest polluters, announce a joint declaration to enhance action. The Prime Minister says world leaders must go further than the 2016 Paris Agreement.
It was ultimately a pledge of action still to come. And it's very frustrating to see countries that have spent 6 years conspicuously patting themselves on the back for signing that promissory note in Paris, quietly edging towards default.
And speaking to journalists about alleged Tory sleaze and MPs having second jobs, Boris Johnson said ministers must prioritise their constituents.
For hundreds of years, MPs have gone to Parliament and also done work as doctors or lawyers or soldiers or firefighters. The most important thing is those who break the rules must be investigated and should be punished.
Border Force vessels are involved in multiple rescue operations in the English Channel once again today. GBNews has been told they're dealing with at least 20 separate incidents, and that's after another group of boats were intercepted earlier. Yesterday, more than 500 people were found in UK waters. Russia has sent 2 bomber planes to patrol the Belarusian airspace at its border with Poland. German Chancellor Angela Merkel asked President Vladimir Putin to intervene over the thousands of migrants that have been converging at the border between the two countries. Putin has blamed the EU for escalating the situation, saying they're trying to strangle Belarus by blocking the border. People in Wales will need to show a COVID pass to go to cinemas, theatres and concert halls. That's from this coming Monday. Protesters have been demonstrating against that, saying those extended measures are not suitable. In Wales, you also need proof of full vaccination or a negative COVID test result to access nightclubs and large events. The Environmental Photographer of the Year winners have been announced. Antonio Aragon Renuncio won the top prize for The Rising Tide Suns, a picture of a boy sleeping in his home destroyed by coastal erosion in Ghana. Environmental Photographer of the Year went to Aman Ali for his picture of Indian wildfires entitled Inferno. Then Kevin Ochieng Onyango was the winner of the Climate Action category with The Last Breath. And Michelle Lapini is the Environments of the Future winner for his picture of flooding at the River Panaro in Italy. You're right up to date. I'm back in an hour. Here's Colin.
Hi there. Well, it was claimed today that half of the migrants massing on the Polish border of the EU are bound for Britain. Several thousand, mainly Middle Eastern men, are currently stuck on the frontier, which separates NATO member nation Poland from Putin-friendly Belarus. Some 17,000 Polish soldiers are guarding the border, which migrants are attempting to breach at several points near the town of Kuznica. In an interview today with the Russian state-run news outlet RIA Novosti, one older migrant said 50% of those trying to get through the border fence ultimately wanted to get to the UK. Well, that disclosure comes as it emerged that hundreds more migrants were attempting to cross the English Channel, providing further evidence that winter will not provide the usual seasonal lull in numbers willing to risk a journey amid some of the world's busiest shipping channels. Well, in a moment, we'll talk to our Home and Security editor, Mark White, who spent the day in Dover. But first, we're going to reflect, as we've done all week, on the situation on the Polish border. From a British perspective, the scenes on the frontier will perhaps rekindle memories of the jungle in Calais, where migrants gathered before attempting to enter Britain. But for the Polish, the scenes are more worrying still, because for them, it's part of a standoff with a neighbouring state, and the stakes are very high. Today, the Russians released footage of nuclear-capable bombers, which have been sent to Belarus as a show of military strength. And as you look at those images, let me tell you too that what's happening on the border is leading to a big rethink in Brussels. The EU, having set its face against the idea of subsidising border walls, now thinks there may be a case for cash for their construction in Poland. Let's talk this through, and we'll do that in the company of the Deputy Foreign Minister of Poland, Paweł Jablonski. Deputy Foreign Minister, thanks so much for your time this evening. I wondered if you can give us an update on the situation on the border, your 250-mile-long border between Poland and Belarus tonight.
Well, good evening. The situation, unfortunately, is very serious. This is the most serious challenge in terms of security we are facing over the last 3 decades. We see growing number of migrants being transported by Belarusian forces to the border, being instructed how to destroy the fence, how to try to break into the Polish territory, and obviously then go further to the other countries in Europe. Mostly they claim that they want to go to the Western countries and Germany, Netherlands. Obviously, we do understand some concerns from the perspective of the UK, because this is also a possibility. The situation is very serious, but we are managing to control it with our forces, with our border guards, police, and military personnel. So far, we are managing. Obviously, it's not 100% secure, but we are able to keep most from entering and to detain most of those who manage to cross illegally.
Deputy Foreign Minister, you mentioned some of those migrants who may be wanting to reach the UK, having traversed through Poland. Can you put any quantum on that? Do you have any intelligence at all that's coming from your officials on the ground there as to how many of these migrants may ultimately want to go all the way to the UK? I mean, do you recognise that figure I quoted in my introduction there, that it could be anything up to a half of all the migrants that have massed on your border?
Well, it's difficult to say specifically because you have to interview all of them and ask what are their motivations. We are interviewing especially those that are already on our territory, that managed to slip through and they were later detained. And most of them are actually pointing to two other countries still on the continent, Netherlands and Germany, but obviously some other destinations appear too. I don't want to put specific numbers because I don't think that matters really much. What is important is that this whole process orchestrated from the very beginning by Belarusian dictator Mr. Lukashenko. It's not a migration wave or migration crisis. This is an orchestrated tool of hybrid warfare because these people are shipped from the countries of their origin to Minsk and then with an organized scheme with Belarusian forces transported to the border. It's all under control of Belarusian state.
How many Deputy Foreign Ministers, migrants do you think there are now on the other side of the border, pressed right up against the fence? I'm hearing figures quoted, 3,000, 4,000. How confident are you, too, in the abilities of your military personnel, your uniformed and police personnel on the border there, numbering in excess of 15,000, that they can stop a major breach of your border?
So right now, on the other side, close to the border, indeed, there is somewhat between 2,000 and 4,000. But we estimate that on whole territory of Belarus, there might be up to 15 or even 20,000 people. And in fact, it would be much more hadn't it been for all diplomatic actions that we undertook in the countries of the region, Lithuania as well, also EU diplomacy to stop these flights from being that frequent. They still are too frequent, and we will be taking action very soon against the airlines, against the entities that are involved. But these numbers are still very, very big. Up to 20,000 on the territory of Belarus, around 2,000 to 4,000 on very close to the border. We decided to deploy around 15,000 personnel all along the border in order to prevent it. And we are able to stop these mass intrusions, mass attempts at intrusion. Obviously, there is no such thing as 100% secure borders. So individual attempts may be at times successful, but we are able to detain most of the people when they enter our territory a little bit later.
You could certainly make the border less porous if you build a wall, and I know there is a plan, you have a plan to build a wall, not necessarily for the entire length of the 250 miles of the border you have with Belarus, but for substantial parts of it. A suggestion today from the European Union, they might be willing to help you pay for that. How confident are you can get some money out of Brussels to pay for a wall?
Well, it certainly is considering. We are absolutely committed to do it. We have already decided that we will do it also out of our national budget. But obviously, this is not just Polish border. This is a border of European Union. This is a border of NATO. So we are very grateful for an approach that actually considers this. When we see this necessity, we also note of the changing approach in general mainstream EU policy, because if we would recall the approach that has been taking place in 2014, 2015, this open border policy, Poland, other Central European countries were very firmly against that. And obviously, over the course of last years, other politicians have understood as well that this was a bad mistake to take this approach. So it's good that now it is universal understanding that it's our own duty, our all collective duty, and it's in the best interest of Europe to actually have secure borders, not open borders, but secure borders, because allowing illegal migration leads to nothing else but more illegal migration.
That is the Deputy Foreign Minister of Poland, Paweł Jablonski. Deputy Foreign Minister, really appreciate your time. Thank you very much indeed. Let's just turn your attention to a poll related to this. Certainly my final question there about the funding of a wall that the Poles are planning on building. Do you think, given the national interest that we might have in this border, that it's something we ought to consider maybe funding from our, well, not least our foreign aid budget, which is back up to about £15 billion a year, isn't it? It's not been running very long, that poll, but you can, in fact, there's far more votes now. It's up to 3,000 after about 27 minutes, and it's heavily in favour of saying, yes, help the Poles build their wall. Well, many of those crossing into Poland are expected to make their way to these shores, and sources have told GB News another wave of migrant boats is expected to set off for UK waters tomorrow morning. The number who've crossed this year is fast approaching 23,000, almost 3 times the number intercepted during the whole of last year. As our Home and Security editor Mark White reports now, the growing crisis is putting increasing strain on the volunteer lifeboat crews who are now often responding to back-to-back calls.
Ploughing through the waves along the Kent coast, Dover lifeboat off to yet another call-out. To say they've been busy of late doesn't begin to describe the workload these volunteers are having to shoulder, as they're called on increasingly to respond to the growing small boat crisis in the Channel. And as we head towards winter, there is no end in sight to a problem that the Home Secretary says she's determined to tackle, but in reality seems powerless to make any meaningful impact on. It was the promise of relatively calm conditions in the Channel this week that brought dozens of small boats back out onto the water. I say relatively calm, for in truth, there are never really ideal conditions on a stretch of water where the winds can whip up in an instant, where the tides are always fast flowing, and where the wakes from the many vessels in this busy shipping lane only add to the obstacles faced by these small boats. On Wednesday, more than 20 of them were intercepted in British waters. Around 10 incidents were reported early morning. The boat's occupants brought back to shore. Here they're on the Border Force cutter Seeker. 5 Border Force vessels were responding to calls throughout the morning. But by lunchtime, there were more small boat sightings than they could possibly manage, at least a dozen in the space of a few hours. And so much of the burden falls on the lifeboats, often called out as many of the migrants are told by the people traffickers to dial 999 and say they're in trouble. The RNLI then have no choice but to respond. But it is putting intense pressure on this volunteer service, where those responding have to leave their main job of work for hours on end, day after day. It's clearly unsustainable. Border Force is purchasing a fleet of new vessels, but they won't be on the water for several months yet. The construction of this purpose-built processing centre in Dover tells you where the Home Office is at, despite the tough talk. We are already approaching triple the number of migrants who've crossed this year compared to the whole of last year. And with thousands gathering in Dunkirk, Calais, Boulogne and elsewhere along the northwest French coast, that number is only set to increase. The numbers painted on the boats in Dover Harbour are well over 800, but there are many more. On the busier days, they're not even towed back into port. They're left to drift in the Channel, eventually washing up on local beaches.
Extraordinary footage. Mark White's alongside me here in the studio. Hard not to be struck, Mark, that final image in your report there of the deflated rib boat just left, just strewn on the beach. It's a reminder of Greece. 2015.
Yeah, and it actually adds to the call-outs that the lifeboat, for instance, is having to attend, because these abandoned boats are seen in the Channel by passing shipping. Sometimes they're upturned, and they're then radioing in to the Coast Guard to say that there is a migrant boat in trouble or overturned in the channel, and they're out and responding to that. So in addition to the actual boats in the channel, more than 20 today, 22 I think at last count, there are the calls that they attend where they either don't find the boat or anyone else, or they discover that it's actually one of the boats that they've had to abandon. Because when you've got several boats in one incident, you can pick up so many people, but then you can only tow maybe a maximum of 2 of these boats back with you.
Mark, what's happening to these people right now? The hundreds of people that you saw there in Dover disembarking with the help of the Border Force and the RNLI, where do they go? How are they processed? What's their fate? Do they ever get told to leave the UK? Once they're in? How does it work?
Eventually, yes, some of them will be deported from the UK, but they're processed in, at the moment, a porta-cabin just by the dock there in Dover Harbour. But the Home Office, as you saw in that report there, is building a £2 million. It's a prefab, but it is more of a sort of a bigger, adequate processing centre. As I say, that tells you really what's going on in the calculations of the Home Office for the year or years ahead. They're expecting more migrants to come across. So they're processed, Colin. But of course, the difficulty that the authorities have is the people smugglers tell them quite deliberately, throw away your passports, driving licenses, bank cards, anything that can identify you. So there then begins a very long process. They come in, they say they're from Syria or wherever the war-torn region is that they feel they will get. I mean, you know, many of them will probably be from Syria and some other pretty nasty places, but not all of them, and a significant proportion of them we know are from Africa, for instance, numerous countries around Africa, and East Africa in particular. But they throw away, as I say, their identified documents. They're then put into the asylum system, and that means that in the first instance, they're put up in hotels and hostels, sometimes in converted army barracks, as we know, of course, down in Kent. And then they are given more sort of semi-permanent accommodation in council houses across the country, because the truth of it is, the process isn't just weeks or months, it can last for years. Even if you're turned down, you can reappeal and appeal.
You said in your report there as well, Mark, that the Border Force will get some new vessels. And I just wondered to what extent it's true here that in meeting demand you create supply, or rather the other way around, in increasing supply you actually beget demand. If you are a people smuggler, you know next year there are bigger boats, there are more boats waiting to pick people up from the channel. You can send more people out.
It's a self-fulfilling cycle of misery, isn't it, really? I think the one advantage of having more boats that's a positive advantage is that it will take the strain off the RNLI. These lifeboats, these are volunteers, remember, just like retained volunteer firefighters. An employer will allow them to partake in that community endeavour, serving the community, knowing that it's really only every 3 or 4 days they'll get a call out and it's doing good for the community. But when they are along the Kent coast, being called out day after day, sometimes multiple back-to-back calls that can take them out for the whole day, well, you can see why some employers might be a little less understanding of that. And of course, while they're out there, other potential emergencies at sea, they're not in a position to answer. So taking the strain off the lifeboats, I think, would certainly be a positive advantage of getting more of these Border Force vessels onto the waters.
Mark, thanks very much indeed. Great report today from Dover. Thanks ever so much. Now, a flight from Birmingham was due to arrive in Kingston this lunchtime, carrying more than 50 Jamaican deportees. They were being sent there, having been sentenced to at least a year in prison in the UK. Their offences included rape, paedophilia, firearms and drug offences, ABH, GBH and kidnapping. But when the plane touched down, only a handful of the 50-plus passengers were on board. Once again, dozens of foreign criminals due to be deported to Jamaica were taken off a plane chartered by the Home Office after 11th-hour appeals from human rights lawyers. One of those meant to be on board previously avoided deportation by swallowing razor blades. Why are all these last-minute appeals being made, and in many instances successfully? Well, the Home Office says there's been a sharp increase in the number of convicts who claim they risk becoming victims of modern slavery should they be deported. Well, with us to discuss, the social commentator Nick Buckley and charity founder as well. Nick, thanks ever so much for talking to us this evening. People hate it, law-abiding folk hate it, when they see people who are expecting to get their just deserts. And in this case, that means if you are a foreign national, you've been sentenced to more than a year of custody in the UK, you will be deported. People hate it when they see that process, that fair and reasonable process, foundering.
People can't understand it. I mean, I can't understand it. We have foreign criminals who have been convicted, had a fair trial, been to jail, released, and we can't send them home. It makes no sense whatsoever.
Let me put the other perspective to you, Nick, if I can. Jamaica's High Commissioner today said, quote, "From a human rights perspective, I am deeply concerned about cases in which persons are being remanded, having lived in the UK since childhood and have no known relatives in Jamaica or familiarity with Jamaica." Do we not have sympathy with those particular cases?
No. Let me put it this way. Imagine this country is your home. We've allowed people to come here. They may be our friends. They may be our guests. They may be friends of friends. They come into our home. We treat them with respect. We give them all the opportunities that everybody else has in our home. But except some rape our daughter. Some murder your brother. And then we phone the police. We want these people evicted. And the police turn around and say, "I'm sorry, they have a right to live in your home." And that's what's happening to our country. If we've got people coming here and living here and they break the law, they need to be deported. It's one of the most simple things that we can say.
The Home Office denies there is a racial dimension to this. They point out that when you look in totality at the number of people, the number of foreign criminals who are deported, the majority are actually going back to continental Europe, to European countries. That hasn't stopped people like Diane Abbott, who are saying this is a system that's rigged against Caribbean prisoners in particular.
We deport more people to Albania every year than we do to Jamaica. We deport more people to Poland. The people who talk about the race of these criminals are basically just race baiters. It wouldn't matter what these people have done. There's always race baiters out there who are trying to stick up for people. And if they were living next door to them, believe me, they'd be complaining as well.
Nick, the law is the law is the law, isn't it, though? And if, it may be lawfare, as they call it sometimes, the idea of using the law almost in a way that goes beyond that which is legalistic to achieve political ends. But nonetheless, the law is there. And if human rights lawyers make these last-ditch 11th-hour appeals to a judge and they are deemed worthy, we are left with a situation where a charter plane that's been chartered at great expense for an excess of 50 would-be deportees arrives in Kingston, Jamaica with just a handful. That's the law.
That is the law, and we should follow the law. I don't blame these criminals for making a case to stay. I don't blame the lawyers and the solicitors for trying to get their clients to stay. I'm happy with all that, follow the law. Who I blame is the government. We had Brexit so we could take back control. We've not even taken control of our borders. You've just done a 20-minute piece on the illegal immigration across the Channel. We had the Home Secretary talking tough all the time and delivering absolutely nothing. They can change the law if they want to. They can change these systems. We've either got incompetence or we've got weak politicians. It's either one or the other.
Nick Buckley, good to talk to you as ever. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
After the break, an amazing twist in the Meghan and Harry story that really is likely to be all over the papers. Tomorrow we'll talk to the doyenne of royal writers, Angela Levin.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk. Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else, I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News. Well, now, the inner workings of Harry and Meghan's media operation have been laid bare. Texts and emails exchanged between the couple and their former head of communications, Jason Knopf. They've been revealed by the Court of Appeal in London. That, by the way, is the setting for a legal challenge being made by the Mail on Sunday newspaper. The paper, it's appealing against a High Court judge's decision previously to declare unlawful the Mail on Sunday's publication of a letter written by the Duchess of Sussex to her father. The witness statement from Mr Knopf reveals that the letter written by Meghan to her father could be leaked, and she asked if it might be better, therefore, to call him Daddy in the correspondence so that it would, quote, pull at the heartstrings if it did come out, as it did. Well, joining me now from Jerusalem, Angela Levin, who has written for, amongst others, the Mail on Sunday. Probably need to mention that, Angela. It's so nice to see you. I focus there on the daddy correspondence bit. That actually, I suspect, and I rather think you do too, will not be the main focus of newspaper coverage of this story tomorrow.
Well, I think the whole thing has been absolutely extraordinary. And what is absolutely astonishing is that the palace aides are now talking and saying what they think has really happened. We don't know yet because there's 3 days of court hearing to be listened to. But before, they always followed the Queen's motto, you know, don't explain and don't complain. And the staff did this as well. They always hoped things would go away, and largely they would. But Meghan and Harry are a different breed now. And it was thought to be so unfair, the judgment was thought to be so unfair and wrong, that aides are now going to speak about their view with a lot of evidence that they're claiming was said and texted to them. It is sort of astonishing.
Well, what seems astonishing is this apology to the court. Can you just explain what it amounts to, Angela?
Well, Meghan apologises that she forgot that she'd actually spoken to that senior aide, and that but otherwise everything's fine. She has an extraordinary way of wiping out anything that doesn't suit her agenda. And to say you could forget that you'd sent somebody text and it was so important, this letter published by the extracts of it, published by the Mail on Sunday, not all of it, was something that she said has been there for years before she had children. This was wrong, actually, because Archie was born before the 2 years, and she just brushes it aside. That's the way she deals with it, as if it's nothing, a little flick of a fly, and it's gone. But here it is very, very serious, because it would seem to mean that what she said in court, what was heard in court, was not true. And I think that her credibility will suffer for this in a significant way.
We clearly, for legal reasons, don't want to speculate what ramifications that might have, but it's certainly reasonable, isn't it, to look at this, as you say, Angela, that a decision can be taken sometimes to pursue legal action in the heat of a moment. It's an emotional decision. It's not necessarily calculated. And unless you've got all your ducks in a row and you know your story inside out, and it definitely is true, then trouble can follow.
Yes, I think that Meghan doesn't like to be beaten. She wants to win. And perhaps sometimes she goes overboard and doesn't listen to the detail, doesn't want to be told about the detail. She's just going to forge ahead. And that's all right in everyday life. But if there's a court case, there are very experienced lawyers and an experienced judge who's going to analyse everything. And if you make accusations, you have to be prepared to hear what other people say to counteract that. And I think she will find that incredibly difficult, unless she sort of brushes aside and said, oh, well, you know, I'm finished with that. I've moved on to greater things. I mean, she said something today in an interview about families and humanitarian issues, and that she wasn't a political person. And she said, I have always stood up for what was right. Extraordinary sentence. Not I stood up for what I thought was right, but what was right. And I think that tells you masses about her attitude, about herself and the things that she does. I can't see how anyone can say what is right. You can't actually say that. You can say this is what you feel is right. But no, that's not a Meghanite thing to say. You have to actually be absolutely straight that she is right. She is powerful. She knows how we should all live and be, and carry on from there.
They're right. We're wrong, and they're sort of in the bunker, and we're all, you know, trolling them and bossing them around and sort of cyberbullying them. And I say that in the context of what Harry's been saying, who said that the term Megxit was misogynistic, invented by internet trolls. I think it's quite a pithy way of explaining what precisely was going on.
Yes, I think that's an extraordinary thing to say, really. He wants to protect Meghan. All good luck to him. He lost his mother, and there's echoes of that in his mind, that he doesn't want that to happen again. You know, he was so traumatised by it, and as we see, is still affected by it, which is fair enough, but he hasn't wanted really to move on. But he can't allow the same sort of thing to happen. And I think that is one of the reasons why he looks so stressed and tired and worn. But in the media disinformation meeting, which he said today, he said, and it wasn't a Harry speak. I mean, I was with Harry for over a year, and he was full of sort of easy language to understand. This is all contrived, and perhaps Meghan's had a say in it. Said, misinformation is a global humanitarian crisis affecting everyone around the world, everyone, all of us. And I think it's ironic that he's standing up for misinformation while his wife has apologised to the Court of Appeal that actually she's been inaccurate.
You stitched that together beautifully by the end there, Angela. Thanks so much. Oh, the irony. Angela Levin, good to talk to you. Thanks a lot. The Home Secretary has given her support to a police investigation into what happened at a university campus in London last night, in which the Israeli ambassador, who was giving a speech there, had to be rushed away by security. This is what happened, or part of what happened.
Aren't you ashamed? Aren't you ashamed?
Well, she managed to hold on to her bouquet, bless her. A large group of protesters gathered outside the building at the London School of Economics, the LSE, and shouted, as you heard, I hope you could hear there, shame on you, as the ambassador left. Afterwards, she issued a statement in which she said Israel would not give in to thuggery. Joining me now, Jake Wallace-Simons, Deputy Editor of the Jewish Chronicle. Jake, thanks for joining us this evening. Do appreciate your time. What should we make of what happened last night at the LSE?
Well, I think for people who follow the activities of the ambassador of Israel, it's no great surprise. Wherever she appears, particularly in a university context, there always are hate mobs outside, blaring through megaphones and even sometimes trying to set off fire alarms to ruin the proceedings and things. And so it's not all that surprising, but I feel that it was given special power by the fact that it happened on the anniversary of Kristallnacht, which was the Nazi pogroms in 1938, which signalled the Holocaust. And while it's not directly comparable in any way in terms of scope, it just was very poignant and sad to see this sort of thing happening in London today.
Yeah, I mean, I hadn't made that connection. I was aware it was the anniversary of Kristallnacht, but I hadn't joined the dots. You're absolutely right. I mean, she's covered by a clearly very competent security detail there. There's no question about that, and there's no suggestion, I think, that her personal safety was in any particular jeopardy. But I suppose there will be those, Jake, who will say, come on. It's the LSE. It's a notorious hotbed of firebrands and radicals, and it's just what you expect there. But that's not really good enough, is it?
It's not, and I spoke to the ambassador earlier today, and her two main points were number one, she's not going to be intimidated, and Israeli diplomats are going to carry on their business as befits any democracy without changing anything because of these people. And secondly, that they didn't succeed in no platforming her. She did give a speech. She was awarded a bouquet of flowers at the end, as you mentioned. And so this wasn't really a free speech issue. This was an issue of a small minority of fanatics who targeted her because of the country that she came from. And this, these words from her were quite brave, considering that she was personally targeted, but also considering that she's had past experience of this as well. During May, when you recall, there was those anti-Semitic convoys going through London shouting hate speech during the Gaza conflict. They came very close to her house. In fact, they passed outside of her house, causing her to be doubtless quite afraid for herself and for her family. So she really has been quite close to what must feel like the front line. And this is, although the security guards there you can see on the screen are professional and are coping very well with it, you can see them running, and they're clearly rather worried. I think it's also good to remember that in 1982, almost 40 years ago, an Israeli ambassador to Britain was shot in the head and paralysed for life while in Britain, while in London. An event which went towards triggering the Lebanon conflict of 1982. So there's precedent for these things turning really very nasty indeed. And so, brave words from the ambassador today.
Yeah, I mean, just a final thought, Jake, and I suppose given what you say there and the context to this, I can scarcely bring myself to say this, but actually I will, because we spend a lot of time in this news channel looking at universities articulating on behalf of others and sometimes saying ourselves that, universities are not doing enough to provide a platform for free speech. Here, the LSE did, so far as I can tell. They did invite the ambassador to speak. She was given a platform to speak. The protesters may have been from the university. They may not have been. It's difficult to know for sure. But at least, on one level, that platform was provided. The university authorities were not intimidated into saying, actually, you know what, it's a bit too much trouble.
You're right, and credit to them for that. I think it's important to recognise the sort of the scope of the opposition to this and the nature of it. I mean, in the crowd that confronted the ambassador when she went to LSE, there were flags flying of Kataib Hezbollah, which is the Iraqi Shiite pro-Iranian militia, the head of which was killed alongside Qasem Soleimani last year, you recall, by an American missile. So clearly there were groups involved in this that were from outside not only the academic world, but also the UK. And there were students involved as well who maybe were being used as some kind of cover or useful idiots, if you will. And I think from a British point of view, these British students who are going along with this kind of agenda may be the leaders of tomorrow. And I think that we all must be very worried that one day the chickens may come home to roost.
Yeah. Jake Wallace-Simons. Jake, really good to talk to you. Appreciate your time. Thanks a lot.
Thanks.
After the break, the Brazier angle and Nicola Sturgeon's offer of reparations to poor countries. Or the guilt, perhaps, that might be involved for the Industrial Revolution. Stay with us.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News. There are rumours that Nicola Sturgeon is not long for Scottish politics, that she may be eyeing up an academic post in America. She leads a party committed to the partition of Britain, and in that she's been thwarted so far. But though the SNP leader has failed to break up Britain, her leadership has coincided with the growth of a kind of Caledonian cancel culture. Whatever Nicola does next, the Sturgeon era will be remembered for making Scotland the UK's capital of woke. For instance, her political power base of Glasgow made history when the city's university became the first institution in Britain to offer to pay reparations for the transatlantic slave trade, a feat of self-loathing that not even Oxford or Cambridge had pulled off. Well, that was a couple of years ago, and it was a story of Glaswegian guilt that was widely covered in the news media, but last week nobody noticed when Nicola Sturgeon used an address in Glasgow to inaugurate a new concept of atonement. Which was speaking at COP26 on the fringes thereof, and whether it was the rival attractions of Leonardo DiCaprio, Sleepy Joe Biden, or indeed Greta Thunberg herself, the Sturgeon's speech hit home with a whimper, not a bang. Well, let's just tell you a little bit more about that, shall we? Because my script has completely disappeared, which is disappointing because I put a lot of effort into it. We'll try and come back to it, shall we? Andrew Doyle's here to reflect on what I was trying to get to there. Andrew, thanks for being here to talk to about my thesis, which has literally fallen apart as I was reading it.
Yes.
What we were trying to say, and I may yet come back to it for the betterment of our viewers' knowledge of the situation, is that the Industrial Revolution, in a speech that Nicola Sturgeon gave, is going to be the subject of reparations to countries that are struggling with climate change.
Yeah.
For going underwater, all the rest of it. And she's saying, we started the Industrial Revolution, and therefore, because we started it and because we've been spewing pollutants into the air for longer than anybody else, we're going to give you some money. Now, that's only one side of the ledger, isn't it?
Yeah,
what it doesn't account for are all the good things. I mean, this is Glasgow, which gave you Joseph Lister, who founded antiseptics, James Watt, the steam engine, great Glaswegians who've massively enhanced our human story.
Yes. Exactly, innovators, scientists, inventors, all of these things that have, in fact, made the world a better place in all sorts of ways for all sorts of countries and all sorts of people. But it's very interesting, isn't it? This is a development out of the reparations argument, the typical reparations argument, which is, of course, about slavery. This seems to be a step beyond that, but it doesn't really make sense. But it does come from the same ideological playbook, which is this reduction of everyone to either an oppressed class or an oppressor class, one or the other. And you notice that, as you said there, she keeps talking about we need to do this because we caused this. But no one who was participating in the Industrial Revolution is alive today. And this is the argument that with reparations that I find so interesting. And there is an argument to be had. So, for instance, we could see that some things that have happened historically do have an impact on communities today. So, for instance, racially segregated housing in American cities. You can see how that could affect and does affect certain families that are alive today. And there is a case there for the government providing reparation. I find that debate fascinating. But when it comes down to, when it is reduced to white people owe reparations to black people or something very simplistic like that, it fails to take into account, we don't know who the ancestors were. Are my ancestors the oppressors because they're white? Because they were likely the oppressed, being in Ireland. So where do I fall into this? Where does a Jewish family fall into this idea of oppressor or oppressed class? And I think the problem with all of these arguments, it's just binary. And if you're going to extend this to the idea of environmentalism and the idea that the Industrial Revolution was the spark that sort of ignited all of our current climate change problems, I mean, how can you possibly trace back who is responsible for that? And also, why would you want to reduce it to just Industrial Revolution equals bad?
Can I give you some executive authority? It sounds like somebody's chasing a cat round our gallery here. So I can either read my Brazier angle from the top,
yes,
from the beginning.
Yes.
So it's a one coherent, cohesive argument that
yes,
people will then be able to replay and enjoy online in
yeah,
some numbers. Or we'll just carry on chatting. What do you think I should do?
I think you should read the whole thing, because I would like to hear, in particular, your powerful rhetoric, which I think is only preserved if you hear the whole speech in its entirety.
That's enough. Here we go then. Thank you. There are rumours that Nicola Sturgeon is not long for Scottish politics, that she may be eyeing up an academic post in America. She leads a party committed to the partition of Britain, and in that she's been thwarted so far. But though the SNP leader has failed to break up Britain, her leadership has coincided with the growth of what some describe as Caledonian cancel culture. Well, whatever Nicola does next, the Sturgeon era will be remembered for making Scotland the UK's capital of woke. For instance, her political power base of Glasgow made history when the city's university became the first institution in Britain to offer to pay reparations for the transatlantic slave trade, a feat of self-loathing that not even Oxford or Cambridge had pulled off. That was a couple of years ago, and it was a story of Glaswegian guilt that was widely covered in the news media, but last week nobody noticed when Nicola Sturgeon used an address in Glasgow to inaugurate a new concept of atonement. She was speaking at COP26, and whether it was the rival attractions of Leonardo DiCaprio, Sleepy Joe Biden, or indeed Greta Thunberg, the Sturgeon speech hit home with a whimper, not a bang. Which is a pity, because contained within Sturgeon's Glasgow declaration was a handout of taxpayers' money that amounts to governmental self-flagellation. The amount of cash was not big, just £1 million, a fund to help developing countries deal with the damaging side effects of climate change. But tucked away amid the enviro verbiage was this paragraph. Quote, unless countries like mine, we're standing here in a city that helped propel the world into the industrial age, countries like mine that have benefited so much from climate change and that have done so much to cause climate change, unless we step up and pay our debt to developing countries now living with the impact, we will fail, and that failure will shame all of us. There is so much that's objectionable in that one paragraph, it's really quite hard to know where to start. That final line, quote, will shame us all, is bad enough, the easy assumption that she can speak for everyone. But that's just rhetoric and cant. It's the substance that should enrage us. Here, in one sentence, is a philosophy that survives no logical scrutiny, but which has obvious fashionable appeal. Like Glasgow's slavery reparations, it relies on the idea that we owe poorer nations a debt. Sturgeon even uses that word, debt. In this case, not for the enslavement of people, but for starting the Industrial Revolution. Well, it's worth for a moment considering the role played in the Industrial Revolution, Sturgeon calls it the Industrial Age, not entirely sure why, by Glasgow. So powerful a dynamo for innovation was it that Glasgow became known as the second city of empire. But Sturgeon's argument begins to dissolve when you start looking at what emerged from Glasgow. Yes, there were emissions aplenty, obviously, but also life-enhancing inventions that improved lives for millions, not just here, not just in Scotland, but in time everywhere. Just think about the Glaswegian discoveries of James Watt in the 1700s and Joseph Lister in the 1800s. Watt pioneered a new type of steam engine that made possible railways and a degree of free movement never before thought possible. Lister came up with the first surgical antiseptic, carbolic acid and phenol, a breakthrough that has unquestionably saved literally millions of lives all around the world. The point is that it will strike many people as simply unfair that Sturgeon can construct a ledger that puts the achievements of the Industrial Revolution only on the debit side, the debit page. Yes, when it comes to industrialisation, we got there first, that's true. Yes, that meant the chimneys and furnaces and foundries started spewing out pollutants here first, but so did the species-enhancing inventions. This was not like stumbling across oil. Yes, we had coal, but our wealth was created principally by discoveries, by brain, but also by brawn, and that took a toll that's easily forgotten. Our ancestors who bled and toiled and perished for the inventions that others now enjoy, both here and abroad. Yes, we got there first, but to focus on the greenhouse gases and not the good things, the reductions our inventions made possible in global poverty, pain, hunger, and even boredom, is to tell a very one-sided story. If we are to pay, as Nicola Sturgeon wants us to, for the damage done, then we might just as well present developing nations with an invoice, a bill. What would their lives look like without the fruits of our industrial revolution? By all means, put a price on carbon emissions. If Nicola Sturgeon moves to the States, let her pay a carbon levy on transatlantic flights, but don't let her get away with this. Backdating compensation for producing emissions without taking account of all the good things that came with them too. That's the Brazier angle. Andrew Doyle's had his say already on that story, so we'll move on. And the question, this one, is, are some London councils putting sanctimony above safety? The question arises after guide dogs were reportedly confused by the sight of traditional zebra pedestrian crossings repainted in colours that symbolise trans rights. There's one of them. Police horses are said to have been similarly discombobulated, been waiting all year to get that word away, by zebra crossings which are no longer in black and white. Quite difficult, isn't it? But in the colour of gay pride rainbows. Andrew, what say you?
I have no idea why these things have popped up all of a sudden. I find them utterly bizarre, and they're everywhere. It's not just the rainbow flag one that you saw there. There's also the pride flag one, which has the extra stripes in a kind of triangular formation. And you know how messy the rainbow flag, the pride flag, has now got, because it's trying to represent absolutely every conceivable identity, and this could go on ad infinitum. But the trouble with it is that guide dogs cannot see them, cannot cross as they would a normal zebra crossing. They get very confused, they get very frightened, they can't find the curb. So and rightly so, activists within amongst disabled people have pointed this out and have complained about this. And now Transport for All, which is a body which looks out for disability rights, has put out a statement saying, you know, that they were concerned as well. They raised the concerns. The 4 planned rainbow crossings in Camden have been put on hold while there's an investigation into this. But within this statement, they also said, we're shocked to see the way in which disability rights have been weaponised against the LGBTQI+ community. It hasn't been. People have just been pointing out that there's a problem here. That's not homophobic. That's just common sense.
These aren't great times for guide dogs. If the trans zebra crossing won't get you, then the e-scooters will. We've just got time to play in this clip from John Cleese.
The Cambridge Union president has said that they've drawn up a blacklist, and Andrew Graham Dixon will be on the blacklist, but it's going to be all speakers that have ever caused offence in the union. John Cleese has now said, well, if you're going to do that, I'm going to cancel myself. I'm not. He was meant to
self-cancelling.
He was meant to appear on Friday. He's not going to be there.
Got to go. Dan Wootton's next. Stand by.
Good evening. Most of us will have a dry day tomorrow, likely to be fairly dull to begin with, and some thick fog patches around in places as well, but steadily, for many, it'll get a little brighter through the day. There's a couple of weakish weather fronts close by to the UK, but developing out in the Atlantic, there's this area of low pressure. That will bring a spell of wet and windy weather. Starts on Thursday night and continues through much of Friday. But back to this evening, and still some patchy rain across parts of the Midlands, South Wales and East Anglia. That's fizzling out. There's another band of wet weather working into northern Scotland. It's still pretty blustery across the far north, but lighter winds in these central areas will allow it to turn quite chilly and could allow some fog patches to form parts of northern England and North Wales in particular. A fairly grey start then to Thursday. There will be a little bit of rain here and there, a few showers mostly in the west, but for a good chunk of the UK, much of the day will be dry, and it should get a bit brighter, particularly in parts of southeast England, northeast England and northeast Scotland. We should see a bit of sunshine, and where it does brighten up, it's still pretty mild. Temperatures again getting into the winds, though, will be picking up in the west, and we're going to see more rain coming in, initially through Northern Ireland during the evening, but then becoming more extensive across Scotland, Wales and northwest England. The winds continuing to strengthen as well. It all adds up to a fairly blustery day on Friday. But with the winds picking up, it won't be as cold overnight. We'll start Friday in double digits for quite a few of us. Then, for the details for Friday, it's all about tracking these bands of rain swinging through. Probably not too much rain across East Anglia in the southeast. Just a few showers zipping through here, but for parts of Northern Ireland, very